Jack the Ripper, London, 1888. The East End was a place few in the city's wealthier districts dared to visit. The fog rolled through narrow lanes, settling like a suffocating blanket over the overcrowded slums of Whitechapel. Poverty defined existence here, lodging houses filled with the desperate, gin shops thriving on addiction, and women forced to sell themselves for a few pennies simply to afford a night's shelter. It was in this setting that a phantom would emerge, a figure who would terrorize the East End, capture the imagination of the press, and become one of history's most notorious murderers. He would be known by a name born of the newspapers, a name that continues to haunt the world more than a century later: Jack the Ripper. The terror began on the last day of August, 1888, when the first of the so-called canonical 5 victims was discovered. In the early hours of August 31st, 1888, the body of Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly, was found in Bucks Row, later renamed Durward Street. She was 43 years old, a mother of 5, and her life had collapsed into destitution after the breakdown of her marriage. At around 3:40 a.m., her mutilated body was discovered by Charles Cross, a carman on his way to work. Her throat had been cut twice, nearly severing her head, and her abdomen bore deep, slashing wounds. Significantly, she had not been robbed. Her few possessions, including a comb and a small piece of mirror, remained untouched. This was no simple street crime. It was something deliberate, violent, and chillingly purposeful. Nichols became the first publicly acknowledged victim of what would soon be called the Whitechapel murders. Just over a week later, the killer struck again. On the morning of September 8, 1888, the body of Annie Chapman, age 47, was discovered behind 29 Hanbury Street. Like Nichols, she was impoverished and struggling with alcoholism. The brutality had escalated. Her throat was cut, her abdomen slashed open, and her uterus had been removed with precision. The coroner, Dr. George Baxter Phillips, remarked that the murderer seemed to have anatomical knowledge, not the work of a random attacker, but someone with skill, perhaps a butcher or a surgeon. The murder of Chapman shocked even the hardened residents of Whitechapel. Newspapers reported the gruesome details in lurid fashion, fueling panic across London. The night of September 30th, 1888 would become infamous as the double event. The first victim was Elizabeth Stride, a 44-year-old Swedish-born woman. Her body was discovered in Dutfield's yard off Berner Street at about 1 a.m. Her throat had been slashed, but unlike previous victims, her body bore no mutilations. Investigators theorized that the killer may have been interrupted, forced to flee before completing his ritual. Less than an hour later, the Ripper struck again. In Mitre Square, within the city of London, Catherine Eddowes, aged 46, was found brutally mutilated. Her face was disfigured, her nose and ear cut, her eyelids slashed. Her abdomen was torn open, and one of her kidneys had been removed. The sheer savagery of Eddowes' murder left even seasoned detectives horrified. For the first time, the Ripper had killed outside Whitechapel proper, suggesting boldness or desperation. The city was now in a frenzy. 4 women had been slain in just over a month, and the killer remained at large. As the murders gripped public attention, letters began arriving at newspapers and police stations. Most were hoaxes, written by pranksters capitalizing on fear, but 3 became infamous. 1. The Dear Boss, letter September 25, 1888, written in red ink. It mocked the police and ended with the chilling sign-off, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." It was this letter that gave the killer his enduring name. 2. The Saucy Jack postcard, October 1st, 1888. It referred to the double event of September 30th, suggesting knowledge of both murders. 3. The From Hell letter, October 16, 1888, sent to George Lusk, head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. It was accompanied by half a human kidney preserved in alcohol. Some believed it was Catherine Eddowes' missing kidney, though this has never been conclusively proven. Whether genuine or not, these communications amplified the terror and cemented the Ripper's legend as a taunting, mocking phantom beyond the police's grasp. On November 9, 1888, the nightmare reached its most horrifying climax. Mary Jane Kelly, a 25-year-old prostitute, was found in her small room at 13 Miller's Court. Unlike the others, she was murdered indoors. The scene that greeted investigators was the most grotesque of all. Kelly's body had been mutilated almost beyond recognition. Her throat was slashed, her face flayed, her breasts removed, and her abdomen eviscerated. Organs were placed around the room in a manner suggesting the killer had taken his time, unhurried and unafraid. It was the culmination of the Ripper's spree, the final and most extreme of the canonical murders. After Mary Jane Kelly, the killings stopped. The so-called Autumn of Terror had lasted a mere 10 weeks, yet it left an indelible mark on London and the world. The Whitechapel murders presented the Metropolitan Police with the greatest challenge of their era. In 1888, detective work lacked the tools we take for granted today. There was no fingerprinting, no DNA analysis, and only rudimentary crime scene preservation. Investigators relied on witness statements, confessions, and chance. Two police divisions were involved: Scotland Yard's Metropolitan Police H Division, covering Whitechapel, and the City of London Police, since Catherine Eddowes' murder took place in Mitre Square, inside city jurisdiction. Coordination between the forces was difficult, often strained. The commissioner, Sir Charles Warren, faced immense public and political pressure. His officers patrolled nightly, interviewing prostitutes, lodging housekeepers, and suspicious men. Hundreds of tips poured in, but leads constantly collapsed. The East End's crowded alleys and transient population made it nearly impossible to track the killer. One telling incident occurred after the double murders of September 30th. A piece of Eddowes' blood-stained apron was found in Goulston Street, near a doorway with chalk graffiti that read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Some believed it pointed to anti-Semitic scapegoating. Sir Charles Warren, fearing riots, ordered the graffiti erased before it could be photographed. This controversial decision destroyed potentially vital evidence. The inability to catch the killer eroded public trust in Scotland Yard. Newspapers lambasted the police as inept, stoking further hysteria. From the beginning, speculation swirled about who Jack the Ripper was. While hundreds of men were questioned, only a handful became serious suspects in historical records. Montague John Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher who drowned in the Thames in December 1888, shortly after the last murder. Some officials thought his suicide suspicious, but evidence was circumstantial. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-Jewish barber with severe mental illness. He was later confined to an asylum. In modern times, DNA testing on a shawl allegedly linked to Catherine Eddowes suggested his involvement, though many experts dispute the evidence as contaminated. Michael Ostrog, a Russian-born conman and thief. Police suspected him, but no direct link to the killings was ever found. Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, a physician and serial poisoner, executed in 1892. Legend claims he confessed to being Jack the Ripper on the gallows, but this is impossible, as he was imprisoned in the United States during the 1888 murders. Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence. Rumors of royal involvement emerged later, driven by conspiracy theories. Historians widely reject this theory as baseless. Dozens of other names have circulated: butchers, sailors, medical students, lunatics. None were ever charged. The truth remains unknown. If the Ripper was the killer, the press was his megaphone. London newspapers in 1888 thrived on sensationalism. The lurid details of the murders, the mutilations, the mysterious letters sold countless copies. For working-class Londoners, The killings were a terrifying reality. For the middle and upper classes, they were a grotesque spectacle. Crowds gathered at murder sites, trampling evidence. Street vendors sold Ripper souvenirs. Songs and ballads about the murders were performed in pubs. The East End itself became a character in the story. The contrast between the grinding poverty of Whitechapel and the wealth of the West End fascinated readers. For many in Victorian society, the Ripper murders were their first close look at the desperate lives of the urban poor. Public pressure mounted against the police. Vigilante patrols were formed, including the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, led by George Lusk, who received the infamous From Hell letter. The Ripper case wasn't just a series of murders. It was a media storm that turned a faceless killer into a global legend. Over time, experts and amateurs alike have tried to answer the same haunting question. Who was Jack the Ripper? Modern criminal profiling suggests the killer was likely a man in his late 20s to 40s, local to Whitechapel, familiar with its streets and alleys, socially isolated, possibly with a background in butchering or medicine, driven by misogyny and sexual violence. Some theories argue the murders stopped because the killer died, was imprisoned, or institutionalized. Others believe he may have continued elsewhere. One modern point of debate is the DNA analysis of Aaron Kosminski. In 2014, researchers claimed mitochondrial DNA from a shawl connected him to Eddowes. However, contamination and lack of chain of custody documentation make the finding unreliable. The mystery remains unresolved. The Whitechapel murders did more than terrify London, they changed society. The sheer horror of the crimes forced attention onto East End poverty. Public awareness of overcrowding, disease, and desperation grew, leading to calls for reform in housing and sanitation. Policing also changed. The Ripper investigation highlighted the need for better forensic methods, systematic crime scene preservation, and interagency cooperation. Within decades, fingerprinting and more scientific detective work would become standard. Culturally, the murders created a new archetype, the faceless, unknown serial killer. Jack the Ripper became a symbol of evil lurking in the shadows, inspiring countless books, films, and theories. Even today, Ripper tours guide visitors through the same streets, keeping the legend alive. The autumn of 1888 ended, and with it, the canonical Ripper murders. Scotland Yard moved on, London healed, and Whitechapel began to change. But the case never closed. Jack the Ripper has endured not just because of his crimes, but because of the unanswered questions. He was never caught, never named, and left no certain trace. His identity remains speculation, an unsolved riddle that continues to haunt. He lives on, not as a man, but as an idea, the embodiment of fear, of cruelty, of the unknown. And perhaps that is why we are still haunted, not simply by who Jack the Ripper was, but by the fact that he could kill, vanish, and become immortal in mystery. If you found this story powerful and want to see more in-depth true crime investigations, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Spectrum. Hit the like button to support long-form storytelling, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters in keeping these conversations alive. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update on the most shocking and thought-provoking cases from around the world.